in the light of COVID and so much tragedy and fear in our world, I've noticed that a lot of people that I have seen posting on social media, there's a lot of fear involved, and there's many different fears, but one of them is the fear of death. Of course, this is, just a brief educational style video, and I can't possibly treat your particular fear of death, and I don't want to minimize people's experiences. So it's really important for you to remember that I'm just sort of giving you a taste of how cognitive therapy might be helpful, as well as spirituality could be helpful in facing, fear of death. So to get started, I'm going to say that there's like 3 categories when it comes to fear of death. And the first one is the process. People are afraid of the process of death and what that might look at. The second one is their fear of what might happen after they die, or the lack of something happening. And the third one is the fear of the death of loved ones. So we'll look at each one of those. So let's first start with the first one, and that's fear of the process of death, which, if you were to ask Dr. Burns, he'd say, well, that's not the fear of death at all, because you're still alive. So it's actually the fear of living. And there's definitely truth to that. When you're going through the process, you're not actually dead yet, you're still alive. That has its own set of circumstances, thoughts, emotions, all that kind of stuff. So, well, let's just touch on it anyways. What might be some of the things you'd be afraid of in the process of death? Well, obviously pain is one. Maybe like that feeling of like dread because you can't breathe. I know like with lung pneumonia, with COVID, there's this can't breathe sensation. And I'm sure that's like super terrifying. But then you're afraid of not being able to breathe. You're not afraid of death. And so that may not be helpful in this moment, but it's something to think about that, we have to be really specific about what we're working on, because otherwise we could just end up in circles and not really being very effective in trying to work through these fears that we're facing. So it's really important to be specific. What specifically are you afraid of? Maybe it's the fear of the unknown. Like, what's that going to be like? What's it going to look like to just lose consciousness? And that seems like it could be very terrifying. And yet we do it every night when we fall asleep. Every night when you fall asleep, you lose consciousness. That's actually what's happening. And so you're actually preparing every night, because that's, people have lived and died for thousands of years on this planet. And sort of it's a natural process, although, natural is maybe too strong a word for those of us who are Christian, but it's normal. Let's put it that way. For us, it's average and normal now. We all expect to die, barring some other miracle happens. That's kind of a given. So why are we afraid of something that is just part of our natural lives? And it's because of these specific thoughts that we're having. So it's really important for you to get those specific thoughts down. So if it's the fear of the unknown, you have faced unknown every day of your life. You can't guarantee what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So you actually have skills to face the unknown, and you just need to tap into those. That sounds really lame, because that was quite lame. There are ways to tap into those through the cognitive tools. And one of them is, examining the evidence. Where are times where you've coped with the unknown before, and how'd that go for you? And you could ask other people, surveying technique, and there's a lot of different cognitive techniques you could use for that. So, there's the fear of the unknown, there's fear of pain. Pain obviously is kind of scary. People face that every day without death. And so how do they do that? And you probably faced pain, and how'd you get through that? So these are things that you could rely on, these things that you've already done in your life that you're here to tell your story right now. Plus there's, there's pain medication, there's cognitive behavior for pain, which actually is really quite effective. And anyways, there could be lots of other fears related to the actual process of death, but again, you need to get specific to work on those. That's really, really important. And the next one is the second one, thumping noises, because I'm talking with my hands and it's under my desk. But the second one would be the fear of what happens after death. And boy, that's a whole kettle of fish, right? Because there's so many different perspectives on what happens when you die. But let's say that they fit into two categories. One is something happens after you die that you're consciously aware of. And the second category B is nothing. There's no conscious awareness. And if it's the second one, if there's nothing after death, then you're not going to know it. There'll be nothing left to worry about. There's no more consciousness. It's again like the sleep. There's it's nothing to worry about because you're not there to worry. Told in Ecclesiastes, the dead know not anything. So it's actually even a spiritual concept that there's this sleep. In fact, the Bible talks about death being asleep, which is kind of interesting because I was mentioning before, even this process of the unknown and that drifting off into unconsciousness. Even the Bible calls death asleep. So it's kind of interesting how those are connected. I won't get too religious on you here. And what if it's the second one? What if there's something after death? Well, then you're afraid of whatever's after death. And that's not the fear of death either. So it's really actually, when you start getting specific, pretty hard to be afraid of death itself. Once you break it down, you're either afraid of a very specific thing happening before you die or at the point of death, or you're afraid of something that's going to happen or not going to happen after you die. And another thing that could be a cause of worry and concern and anxiety is what's going to happen to those you love after you die, right? Like you might be a young mother or a young father. You might be a young mother or a young father, and you're worried about your children. What's going to happen to them? Or maybe, you're worried about a legacy that you've established, and are people going to take care of that for you in the way that you would like to see? And that's a current anxiety and fear that you have while you're alive. And again, once you're dead, you wouldn't worry about that anymore, right? It's a current anxiety. And so how could you deal with that? Is there maybe that's a good anxiety. Maybe it helps you prepare. We know there's traditions where people have godparents. We have wills to help establish this. And sometimes, a lot of people are afraid to do a will, that they don't even want to think about it. They want to think about death. They don't want to think about what could happen. And this fear kind of holds them back. I know a story of a young family, we're young and, don't really want to think about it. And unfortunately, they were in a car accident and both parents passed away. And their two children end up in this terrible custody battle between the grandparents. And it was heartbreaking for these kids. They were really close to the one grandparent, but the courts were trying to give 50-50, but they didn't even live in the same area. And it was hard to be stable if they shared custody. And it was a really tough situation because the parents didn't do a will. And so, anxiety might give you the motivation to get your affairs in order. And that might be a good thing for your loved ones when you're passed. So, or if you even pass, like if you're young, you might not be in. I'm trying to be so encompassing in this video because I know there's people who are elderly who might be watching, and there's young people watching, and some people might be sick already, and some people are just like surfing the YouTube and come across this video. So again, it's getting specific and working through those thoughts with someone you trust, or, going through it on your own. Like, how realistic is this? How truthful is this? It's a different way I could look at it. These are kind of the questions that we would, just a few of the questions we might use. There's lots and lots and lots of other tools in cognitive and therapy in general. So So that's, the second one is this fear of what's going to happen after you die. Then of course there's the religious worries, like, if there is a heaven or hell, are you, good enough for heaven? Too bad, bad enough to go to hell, whatever. Like, and those would be very specific to your religion and what you believe. And again, that anxiety might be a benefit. It might help keep you searching for truth and looking for answers. And that's not always a bad thing. But when the anxiety is so much that's either causing you to not look because you're too afraid to look, or it's causing you just enormous amount of pain and worry, like, every day you're thinking about it, then that's where we'd want to get you some help, because nobody should be stuck in a rut where they're just going through this anxiety circle over and over and over. It's just a really, really sad, hard place to be. And I know in my clinical practice, we've definitely been able to work through this stuff with clients and even in my own life. So yeah, I will definitely put some materials in the description below for you to kind of explore this further. And let's see, did I cover the first and second category good enough? So we covered the first category, which is the process. So there's pain, there's the anxiety of maybe, breathing, what's that going to be like? What's going to be like drifting off onto unconsciousness? We talked about that being sleep. And there's pain management tools, and there's some specific things that you could get help for if you're afraid of very specific things. And then we talked about the second one, which is fear of what's going to happen after you die. And again, if that's a religious thing for you, do some exploration and see how you can find some closure there. If you're religious, if you're not religious, you could always use Pascal's wager, or you could do the thought processes around what is it that you're afraid of, the emptiness, because if you really believe there's nothing afterwards, then there's nothing after. There's nothing to fear, because you won't be around to fear anymore. And I guess I would say that there are some people who fear that they want to have as much fun as possible, but I think that that's great. I think that just says, hey, I want to live as long as possible. I want to enjoy life as long as possible. And that itself won't cause anxiety. Sure, there's be disappointment that I can't do it as long as I'd like to, but anxiety is related to some fear of some future event happening to you. And so if there's anxiety attached, then there might be some other thoughts there that are buried a little deeper, and you might have to do some contemplating on what am I really afraid of, and don't give up on that. Like, dig deep, because want to make sure that you're finding the solutions that you need. So that's the first two. Third one would be fear of losing a loved one, and this one is really important to address, because grief is a real part of all of our lives. We've all lost someone or something. And I know I've talked to clients where they're like, well, yeah, but it was like a grandparent and I totally expected and it was normal. And I think that's a really valid grief. I think it's actually wonderful and beautiful that we can, accept these things as part of our lives. And there's the circle of life, Lion King or whatever, that's really important for us to embrace, because I think it really helps with the anxiety. And the reality is we can't do anything about it. We can't stop everything. We can't stop the world from turning. People die every day, and it's super sad, and it's really hard and painful when it's someone personal to us. And the closer we are with them, the more intense that is. And I would say, if the grief is overwhelming you and it's been a period of time, and I don't want to give a number, I know this is going to sound really general, but that's the problem. It's so individual. But if you're kind of getting your feelers up thinking, I think this is going on too long and it's too intense still, get help, because complicated grief is a real thing. And that can cause a lot of pain and depressive thoughts and sad thoughts. And so I would say reach out if you're facing that that complicated grief in the moment. Um, but I won't get into that because again, I want to stick with the current one, which is the fear of something happening, which is like that anxiety provoking, right? The person is going to pass away. And I would say it's pretty hard to prepare for any eventuality. And if we constantly live in a state, I'm getting into advice giving, which I try to avoid. Like I try to make these educational versus advice giving, but I think I'm going to launch into it just a little bit of advice giving because I think it's been helpful. I've been told it's been helpful by some of my clients. So getting back to this what if syndrome, or this thinking about all these future things that could go wrong, it's a really painful place to live, is to be constantly dwelling on future events that could possibly happen. It can be all consuming because there are so many variables in anyone's life that you could really go on and on about, what if this happened, what if that happened. And so if the fear of someone dying is very close because maybe they are really sick, they could be sick with COVID, they could have cancer, and they are looking like it's getting close, that anxiety might prompt you in a healthy way to connect with them as much as possible, to just hold on to that relationship as long as you can, and maybe even prevent some bad things from happening, like making sure they're taking their medication, and that the hospital's doing all they can. So all those can actually have some really important benefits, and it shows how much you love and care about this person. So I would say, what, a little anxiety is really healthy. We're human beings. We can have anxiety and disappointment and frustration and joy and excitement all wrapped into one. And that's what it means to be human. That's actually, the healthier you are, the more you're okay with having this plethora of emotion at the same time. And I think that shows a good degree of emotional intelligence, as they say. So that would be the three. And of course, I just barely scratched the surface. And each one of these we could just dive into for hours on end. And there might be really specific fears that you have about death. And so if you do, love to hear what those are, and get those written down so that you can kind of walk through in your own mind, what is it that I'm really afraid of? And how might I look at that in a different way, in a healthier way? So I hope that this little taste of how you could look at the fear of death from a cognitive perspective, and even a spiritual one, was helpful for you today.